Okay, welcome to learning module number 8, where we're going to go over the 990 form, which is the organization's, essentially, their tax return. Okay, so nonprofit organizations have to file their 990 if they have gross receipts of more than 25,000. So basically, if they bring in, either through contributed revenue or earned revenue or investment income, more than 25,000, they have to file. Now, there is a 990 EZ form, so organizations that have less than $100,000 in gross receipts will often file kind of a modified, simplified version called the EZ. Over 100,000, you're going to file the regular 990. It is a publicly available document, and organizations are required to make it available to anyone who asks for it. It's also, they are able to, or it gets turned into the state, and the state charitable license division and the Office of the Treasury have it on file, so you can drive up to Lansing and theoretically see any 990 of any organization in the state of Michigan. You can also go to organizations like GuideStar.org or the NCCS, National Center of Charitable Statistics, will have these 990s available on the web. It is due on the 15th of the 5th month following the close of the fiscal year. So, just so we're clear, if your fiscal year ends December 31st, your 990 is going to have to be filed by May 15th. Okay, so much like we did with the financial statements in learning module number 7, we're going to kind of I'm going to hit the highlights of the 990 form in this learning module, this part of the learning module, and then we'll do a how to read the 990 when we go over it with an actual example. So generally speaking, the first section of the 990 is going to look at revenues and expenses. You're going to list them, usually 2 years of information, so last year and this year. You're going to be able to see the change in net assets, but we're smarter than perhaps the average donor, and we're going to remember that when we're talking revenues and expenses, it is not cash, right? This is going to be more akin to the statement of activities or income statement than a cash flow statement. Next up, there is an area where organizations can talk about their program services. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, I was just doing part 1, where's part 2? Part 2 is just right now the disclosures of the CEO has to sign, the CFO, if there's whoever's filing the tax form for them has to sign. So part 3, though, is the program services accomplishments, and basically you'll see that there's 4 areas where the organization has space to highlight 4 different programs and talk about how much money they bring in and how much money they spend on those 4 programs. The next big section of information is, you can probably look at it right there. It's all of the things that we've been talking about. So it's taking those financial reports, those audited financials, and putting them into a simplified version that goes to the public. So we've got our balance sheet, which lists our assets and liabilities. We're going to have a statement of functional expenses. We're going to have, the listing out of the 3 categories of net assets so that someone reading the 990 can get a good sense of how much cash we have on hand, what's temporarily restricted, do we have an endowment that's permanently restricted, and of course the statement of functional expenses is going to show us where we spent our money. The next section of the 990 is going to take a look at the people who are part of our organization. So we're going to list out our board members. Their names are going to be published there, as well as if they have, if they're just a general board member, or if they're, the treasurer or the president, things like that. It's also going to have information about the number of hours that they work per month on the organization. This is often where you will find the compensation of the CEO listed, and either here or in a schedule that is attached, you'll see the listing of compensation of key employees. So how much people in our organization make. And generally speaking, when I started in the nonprofit world, it was you had to list the top 5 employees, no matter and how much they made, regardless of how much they made. So I remember the moment when I was making $50,000 a year, but I happened to be one of the top 5 in an organization, and lo and behold, my salary became public knowledge. Now the listing it requires you to list the salaries of key employees if they are over $100,000 per year. Okay, then there's some other information that we want to pay attention to. There's questions, and sometimes this will be actually earlier in the 990. It depends on what version you're looking at, and it depends on what year you're looking at, because the form changed about 3 or 4 years ago. But there's a whole series of questions and disclosures, basically. So it's going to ask for information about lobbying that the organization does. It's going to ask about conflict of interest, and we'll see that coming up in a minute. Basically, you run through all of these disclosures and you see what questions did I answer yes to, and your eye immediately goes to that, and then you look for, okay, is this a question that an organization should be answering yes to, or does this represent a problem? There's also a section on income producing activities. So basically this is all the revenues, how I make my money. We're going to look at related and unrelated revenue, which we're going to have a whole section. The next set of slides is going to be about unrelated revenue. But the related revenue is going to provide us with information about our contributed revenue, our earned revenue, our investment income. It's also going to break down some of our fundraising into, how many events do we do, and how much do we raise from our events? What type of grants do we get? Is it government? Is it foundation? And so this can be a really useful part of the 990 if you are trying to figure out, is this organization financially stable? Because it really delves into how they get their revenue. At the end of the 990, you'll find a variety of schedules, and the organization in its disclosures has to talk about, okay, yes, we have to file this schedule. We have to file Schedule E, Schedule O. Almost everybody files Schedule A, which you'll see when we go over it in depth. This is where you're going to find information about contractors. You're going to find more detailed information about conflicts of interests. You're going to remember when I was talking about disclosures and I said, look for questions that they answered yes to. Well, generally speaking, if you answer yes to a question, you have to provide additional information about it, usually in one of the schedules, or you attach it at the end of the overall 990. So that's kind of the overview of the 990. Next, I want you to go on to the unrelated business income tax slides, and then we'll go on to how to read a 990.